Good morning. Activists in Atlanta are working on a ballot measure to stop a new police training facility. Soon a judge will rule on the validity of thousands of signatures in support of holding a referendum. It's Morning Edition from NPR News. America's busiest shopping weekend will soon be upon us. Jaime Martinez, a record-breaking 182 million people are expected to go shopping between Black Friday and Cyber Monday, but are the deals any good? And this Thanksgiving, we remember the late music commentator Miles Hoffman with some of his favorite musical turkeys. Speaking of turkeys, how did the bird become a popular dish in Taiwan? It's Thursday, November 23rd, and it's a party in the USA. Happy birthday to singer Miley Cyrus. She's 31 today. News is next.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. A temporary pause in fighting is expected to begin soon in Gaza, but there are reports of new air and missile strikes along Israel's northern border with Lebanon. NPR's Brian Mann reports the son of one of Hezbollah's leaders was killed yesterday by an Israeli strike.
Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia backed by Iran, confirmed that Abbas Raad, the son of one of the group's leaders, was killed Wednesday by an Israeli airstrike. 4 other Hezbollah members also died. Hezbollah said in a statement it fired rockets at numerous Israeli military targets, hitting as far as 9 kilometers inside Israel. Israel's military, meanwhile, says its fighter jets targeted Hezbollah units, and an Israeli tank also fired on a military post across the border. Some Israeli communities in the north have been evacuated because of the increased violence. This comes as Israel and the Palestinian group Hamas are preparing for a 4-day pause in the war inside Gaza. A hostage and prisoner exchange is expected to begin Friday. Brian Mann, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
A state of emergency is in effect for a county in southeastern Kentucky after a freight train derailment yesterday. Stan Ingold with member station WEKU reports more than a dozen rail cars left the tracks north of Livingston, triggering a chemical spill.
In a statement, CSX officials said one member of a 2-person crew was treated for a minor injury. The statement referred to 2 of the cars that left the tracks as molten sulfur cars and said that they were breached. CSX says that it's working with Rockcastle County first responders and teams are being deployed to assist affected residents. The governor's executive order allows the state to activate resources, including Kentucky Emergency Management and the Kentucky National Guard. Response efforts for the incident are ongoing, and local officials are encouraging those in the town of Livingston to evacuate. For NPR News, I'm Stan Ingold in Richmond, Kentucky.
An investigation is underway into a car crash and explosion at the U.S.-Canadian border yesterday. The vehicle was speeding in upstate New York when it flew over a fence and slammed into a security station at a bridge that connects the U.S. and Canada. New York Governor Kathy Hochul says officials have so far ruled out terrorism.
We've been on heightened alert since October 7th. That's why it's so important for me to stand here and tell the world, based on what we know at this moment, and again, anything can change, there is no sign of terrorist activity with respect to this crash.
The crash killed 2 people. The FBI says a search revealed no explosive materials and no terrorism nexus was identified. The White House says the Department of Homeland Security is in close contact with its Canadian counterparts. This is NPR News in Washington. The Biden administration is asking a federal judge to reject a legal challenge to the U.S. military academy at West Point's consideration of race in admissions. The Department of Justice argues that diversity in the Army remains key to national security. Earlier this year, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down race-conscious admissions policies at colleges and universities. A new study shows that strong friendships help older adults stay physically and mentally healthier. But as NPR's Ritu Chatterjee reports, good friends can also have a bad influence.
The study authors wanted to know whether having strong friendships had an impact on the health of older adults. So they looked at data on nearly 13,000 people 50 years and older from the Health and Retirement Study, which spanned across 8 years. They found that having stronger friendships in this age group predicted better health and lower risks of dying over the duration of the study. Those with stronger friends were 9% more likely to exercise and had a 19% lower chance of having a stroke. This group also had a 17% lower chance of being depressed. The scientists also found that good friends can have a bad influence on one's health by making it more likely that someone will smoke. The findings were published in Epidemiology and Psychiatry Sciences. Ritu Chatterjee, NPR News.
Stocks across Asia traded mostly higher today. Markets in China and Hong Kong posted gains. Wall Street is closed for Thanksgiving. Trading resumes tomorrow. This is NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Luminescence Foundation, dedicated to shedding light on neurological research focused on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases and supporting land conservation initiatives, and the listeners who support this NPR station.
Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. It's just about 5 after 8, and you're listening to Morning Edition right here on NCPR. So glad that you could join us on your Thanksgiving holiday, whether you're alone or with family and friends. We are so glad that you could join us here on NCPR. We are so grateful for you and what you contribute to your neighbors and to your community. Coming up on Morning Edition, protests continue over a planned police training facility near Atlanta as construction is already underway and a petition to get voters to weigh in is stalled in court. We'll hear the latest coming up in about 5 minutes here on NCPR. Then join us after that for a story about the Detroit Lions. They've hosted a Thanksgiving game for more than 80 years, the only NFL team to do so. This year, they have a chance to go to the Super Bowl, too. We'll hear more on this story coming up from Quinn Kleinfelter in Detroit here on North Country Public Radio. At last check, it was 34 degrees in Alex Bay, 31 in Chateauguay, and 36 degrees in Lake George, and cloudy everywhere, but no precipitation, so it should be pretty smooth driving wherever you're headed to today. Overnight tonight, starting around 8 o'clock, though, a chance of a wintry mix in the high peaks.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm E. Martinez in Los Angeles, California. Israel says the deal to implement a 4-day pause in fighting in Gaza has been delayed until Friday at the earliest. So that means Israel continues to strike Gaza in an attempt to destroy Hamas, and families on both sides have to wait to bring their loved ones home. We're joined now by NPR's Lauren Frayer in Ramallah in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Lauren, what's holding up this agreement?
Well, Israel's national security advisor says talks with Hamas are still progressing and that the release of hostages held in Gaza and Palestinian detainees held in Israel will not take place, as you mentioned, before tomorrow. He didn't give an explanation for the delay. The deal, as we understand it, is this: a 4-day pause in fighting, 50 hostages released by Hamas in stages, like one batch per day, and 150 Palestinian prisoners and detainees released from jails in Israel. Now, just to note, this isn't a published document, so we're relying on both sides to describe what they have agreed on, and there could be discrepancies. For example, last night in a speech, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the International Committee for the Red Cross will visit all of the hostages inside Gaza and deliver medicine. But today, a Red Cross spokesperson told me the group isn't aware of any such agreement to do that. It's ready to do so if called upon, though.
So that means it's got to be pretty stressful for a lot of people. What kind of things are people saying?
Yeah, I mean, for families of hostages kidnapped in Israel on October 7th, they're like on tenterhooks waiting for this release. Here's a man named Nimrod Shakar. My colleague Brian Mann met him in a Tel Aviv square where protesters have gathered. And he's angry at the Netanyahu government for not getting a deal to free all of the roughly 240 hostages.
The majority of the Israelis will demand this from our government, and we don't care what are the means to get this deal.
Meanwhile, here in the West Bank, I've been meeting families of some of those 150 Palestinian prisoners and detainees who are slated for release. Most of them are from the West Bank and Jerusalem. They're mostly teenage boys, a few teenage girls, and several dozen adult women, some of whom have been in Israeli jails for years. But any homecoming preparations here are really muted because of the toll that this war has taken just south of here in Gaza. I spoke this morning with a woman named Sahar Hantuli. She's a French and English teacher here in Ramallah, and she said she's been in agony.
Because our people in Gaza, they are suffering from now 47 days. There are martyrs there physically, and we are martyrs here psychologically.
Meanwhile, an Israeli military spokesperson says forces continue to bomb Gaza, some 300 targets there in the past 24 hours. He says they're using ground forces, drones, and precision-guided missiles. Israel says this is all aimed at destroying Hamas.
Lauren, this deal isn't in trouble, is it?
I mean, it's hard to tell. It's not unusual for temporary ceasefires to be delayed or to falter once they do start. There are a lot of details to work out. As I mentioned, the discrepancy over what Netanyahu said last night and what the Red Cross is saying today. I mean, remember that the Hamas leadership is still believed to be underground, in tunnels under Gaza. And negotiators that I've spoken with have told me this requires passing notes, down through the tunnels, then up to Gaza above ground, out to Egypt, and to negotiators in Qatar and the U.S. and in Israel. And so not only did it take time to get this deal, weeks of negotiations, but it takes time to negotiate the implementation of all of the details to work it out.
That's NPR's Lauren Frayer. Lauren, thanks.
You're welcome.
In Atlanta, a new police training facility is being built on 85 acres of wooded land. Protesters have long railed against the plan. More than 60 people have been arrested this year during protests. Some have been violent, and some protesters are now charged with racketeering. Some are also facing domestic terrorism and money laundering charges. Atlanta's mayor and Georgia's governor still support the training facility, and a petition to put the training center's funding on the ballot is stalled in court. We're joined now by Shemaine Cruz of WABE in Atlanta, who's been following this story. So what exactly do the protesters want and why?
Well, for more than 2 years now, protesters, and that includes environmentalists and anti-police groups, they've been saying that they fear the state-of-the-art facility will further militarize police from around the country who come to train here. And they say that construction is going to exacerbate environmental damage in this low-income, majority Black area. So while you have some groups who say that the facility should just be built somewhere else where it isn't in people's backyards and destroying valuable green space in the community, you also have some people who don't want this facility to be built at all. And protests have only intensified, and they gained national attention after state troopers shot and killed a protester at the site in January. And then recently, a special prosecutor announced that he would not be bringing charges against those officers involved. He said that he found their use of deadly force was objectively reasonable. And this comes, as you said earlier, while dozens of protesters are facing racketeering and domestic terrorism charges. So protesters have also been calling on those to be dropped.
Yeah, and despite all this, the mayor of Atlanta, the governor of Georgia, they've still stood behind the project. Why is that?
City officials say the training center is needed to improve things like de-escalation training, to boost morale, and to recruit and retain more officers. The Atlanta Police Department is still about 500 officers short. And so quite frankly, they say that they are simply spending too much money right now having to rent other facilities, or that they're training in parking lots of old shopping centers or abandoned schools with mold and other problems. The city also already owns this land where the center is being built. And once it's completed, it's supposed to have walking trails for the community and a place for them to keep their horses and canines, as well as a mock city where officers can train on how to conduct raids, which is why protesters call this project Cop City. Just last week, protesters set several cement trucks on fire owned by a company working on the project. But Atlanta Police Chief Darren Shearbaum said that despite this type of action, the project is still on track to be completed in December of next year.
All right, I saw that organizers delivered 116,000 signatures to City Hall to get a rare ballot measure started that would ask Atlanta voters to weigh in on whether they want the facility. Where does that stand?
Well, yes, they submitted the signatures to City Hall in late September, but they've just been sitting there ever since because almost immediately city officials refused to begin verifying them until a judge rules on whether they're even valid. So there's a court hearing scheduled for next month where we should find out more.
That's Shemaine Cruz with WABE. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Of all the Thanksgiving traditions, there's one in Detroit that's been a constant for decades, a heaping helping of hapless Lions football. The Detroit Lions have played on Thanksgiving Day since 1934, and they're about to play the Packers in the first of 3 NFL games today. The Lions have struggled for a long time, but not this year. They're really good this year. They've got a realistic chance to reach the Super Bowl, and that gives Detroit fans something to be extra thankful for. Quinn Kleinfelter reports from member station WDET.
Thousands of people draped in Lions jerseys, jackets, and hard hats painted like the team's helmet packed parking lots outside Detroit Stadium before a recent home game. For fan Emily Frickin, the Thanksgiving Day game to her means football, family, and hopefully not fumbling the dinner made among fellow tailgaters.
First time my dad tried deep frying a turkey, went terribly, terribly wrong. Blowing up like a little bit of the deep fryer, but every single Thanksgiving we were here at the crack of dawn, deep frying a turkey, and, it's just been in my blood ever since I've been little.
BJ Zelenek says generations of families have grown up with a love for Lions Thanksgiving Day football.
We've had our grandkids dress up as little turkeys. We've also done the parade.
Detroit's Thanksgiving Day parade draws tens of thousands to the city's downtown. But Pro Football Hall of Fame historian John Kendall says the NFL was hard-pressed to create the same interest in the Thanksgiving Day games until radio executive George Richards bought the team in 1934 and created a network of 90 stations to broadcast the holiday contest.
What he did during this time frame and that Thanksgiving Day game, really had an impact on the league as a whole and its growth into what it is today.
Yet the Lions often struggled and have not won a playoff game since 1991. The team hit rock bottom in 2008.
The Detroit Lions have completed the first non-winning season of a 16-game schedule in NFL history.
Some NFL owners unsuccessfully lobbied to take the Thanksgiving Day game away from Detroit, arguing the Lions' typically poor performance was a bad look for the league. The Lions roared back about 3 years ago when former player Dan Campbell became head coach. He famously pledged to develop a team as tough as its city, one that would rise up every time it was knocked down and, quote, bite a kneecap on the way. A team, Campbell says, that's worthy of the Thanksgiving Day showcase.
Everybody's watching, all your family, all your friends, and this is the type of game, man, you come out of, and you got somebody you went to school with in second grade who's texting you, and family member, everything. It's special.
That sentiment echoes inside the Lions locker room. Offensive lineman Panay Sewell says the tradition reached him even while growing up in American Samoa.
Kind of depend on whether my dad knew there was a game on and he could turn on the antennas and stuff like that. But no, we'd actually just have our own type of football game in the backyard.
Let's go Lions! Let's go Lions! Let's go Lions!
Back among the tailgaters outside Detroit Stadium, Emily Frickin smiles at the sense of hope she feels among Lions fans now. Frickin says it's what her late father always wanted to be part of. And she says, in a way, he is.
So I have his team ring and his wedding ring on my necklace right now. He wanted to see a Lions Super Bowl. So I'm confident that will happen soon in my lifetime.
She says perhaps that would also start a new NFL tradition, a perennial championship contender here. For NPR News, I'm Quinn Kleinfelter in Detroit.
This is NPR News.
You're listening to Morning Edition right here on North Country Public Radio. It's about 20 after 8. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. Morning Edition goes until about 9 o'clock. Then we'll have the BBC News Hour from 9 to 10. Then after that, it's a program I look forward to all year, Turkey Confidential. That's the Splendid Table's annual Thanksgiving show. Francis Lamb takes calls and comes to the rescue of Thanksgiving cooks, kitchen helpers, and dinner guests during the biggest cooking day of the year. That's today between 10 and noon right here on North Country Public Radio, which is supported by Gray & Gray & Associates CPAs, an accounting and financial services firm in northern New York with offices in Canton, Potsdam, and Spring Hill, Florida, graycpas.com, and by the AdirondackExplorer.com and AdirondackAlmanac.com, presenting daily updated news on public policy, environmental issues, and local communities in the Adirondack Park. At last check, it was 34 degrees in Alex Bay, 31 in Chateauguay, and 36 degrees in Lake George. Mostly cloudy throughout the region today, though, and should be pretty smooth traveling. No precipitation forecasted, at least not until this evening, when there's a chance of a wintry mix in the high peaks in Saranac Lake region. But elsewhere should be clear skies, no precipitation, but maybe a little bit cloudy. Overnight tonight and into the day tomorrow, too. Highs in the mid-30s tomorrow, but should be mostly sunny skies ahead.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Storyworth. Each week, Storyworth emails a loved one a question about their life. After a year, they'll publish family memories into a bound book to keep forever. Learn more at Storyworth.com. From the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, recognizing exceptionally creative individuals. This year's MacArthur Fellows and more information are at macfound.org. From the Annie E. Casey Foundation, using research and evidence to develop solutions that help families and communities create a brighter future for young people. More information is available at aecf.org. And from listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
This is Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Ian Martinez. It wouldn't be Thanksgiving on Morning Edition without longtime classical music commentator Miles Hoffman. Hoffman died earlier this year of leukemia. He was 71 years old. Hoffman had an infectious love of classical music and was fond of dishing up musical puns for his Thanksgiving conversations with Morning Edition host Renee Montagne. Topics included musical leftovers, Thanksgiving drumsticks, and plucking. Hoffman's commentaries were funny and insightful. They were also warm and comforting, just like the best Thanksgiving traditions. Here he is in 2004 talking with Renee about musical turkeys, pieces composers wish they'd never cooked up.
First, Miles, happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Renee. Happy Thanksgiving to you, too.
Since we have, as we said, we're on the subject, have all composers, even the geniuses among them, written a turkey or two?
Well, I think so. You know, I think one of the ways you judge a composer's stature, how great the composer is in a sense, by the batting average, the ratio of great pieces to turkeys. And among the great composers, that ratio is very, very high. There's an interesting example. A very, very familiar piece to American audiences is Aaron Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man. This is a great fanfare. He wrote it in the 40s, and then he incorporated it into his third symphony. But he wrote a couple of other fanfares, too, that I think remain in the justly neglected category. You know, call it what you want. I don't think that's going to make the top 10 anytime soon, or the top 40, or the top 100.
Is there any relationship? Would a composer follow a less good piece with a masterpiece?
I think it depends. I think that great composers have just as often followed masterpieces with other masterpieces. But there is, Renee, a very famous example of a great piece following a clunker. Beethoven composed a piece, it's listed as Opus 91. And it's called Wellington's Victory. was intended to commemorate Wellington's victory at the Battle of Vittoria in Spain over Napoleon's army. And what did it share the program with, this Opus 91 clunker? It shared the program with Opus 92, which is the Seventh Symphony of Beethoven, generally acknowledged as just one of the greatest pieces ever written.
One might think that a not-so-great work wouldn't be available as a recording.
Well, it's available because, first of all, it's a curiosity. If you just listen to the beginning of Wellington's victory, I don't know how long it lasts. There's this sort of inane and insane drum beat thing that goes on at the beginning. I guess it's supposed to announce the arrival of the soldiers.
Tell me, though, did he in his day, did he know it? Did he hear it and say, oh, whoa, what have I done?
Well, I think so. I mean, he wasn't exactly proud of this piece. As a matter of fact, I've read at least one historical account that says he was disgusted that the public really went for this piece. But I think composers generally know. Some composers are tougher on themselves than others. Some composers have written potboilers and written pieces for commercial purposes, and they just crank them out and they don't worry about it. Others, very harsh in their self-judgment. I think of Johannes Brahms. His solution was to roast his turkeys, Renee. He just burned them. When he wrote a piece that he thought wasn't up to his usual standards, he burned it. And so many pieces by Brahms are lost to posterity because he thought they were turkeys.
Let's talk about the reverse of that. Are there also sort of truly delectable works that were thought in their day to be turkeys?
Oh, yeah, that happens a lot and has happened. There was a very famous, very powerful critic in Vienna in the mid-19th century. His name was Eduard Hanslick. And after hearing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto for the first time, this is what he wrote. He wrote, "The violin is no longer played. It is torn asunder. It is beaten black and blue. We see wild and vulgar faces. We hear curses. We smell bad brandy. Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto brings us for the first time the horrid idea that there may be music that stinks in the ear." This is, so how's that for a critical... And
Tchaikovsky,
yeah, and Tchaikovsky remembered that review word for word for his entire life. But, I mean, this is the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, which is a greatly beloved and wonderful piece.
How does it go from something that the critics hate or is thought to be awful to something that grows to be cherished?
Well, that's a very interesting question. First of all, critics can be wrong. And with the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, by the way, the verdict wasn't unanimous, but there was some really strong reaction against it. But what you also have is you have this very interesting working of history where a general consensus over time develops. And it's a consensus that's made from a combination, really, of many experts over time and the opinion of the public. And this consensus, Renee, really is usually quite reliable. And in fact, throughout history, most of the pieces that we now think of as great pieces, it didn't take too long for them to be recognized. Whereas if, a piece has had 75 or 85 years and it's been around for that long, for 3/4 of a century, and it hasn't caught on, chances are it's not going to catch on, and there's probably a good reason it's not going to catch on.
Miles Hoffman is violist and artistic director of the American Chamber Players and author of the NPR Classical Music Companion. And Miles, what will you be listening to as you feast on a turkey, I'm guessing?
I hope it's turkey. I will mainly be listening to the sound of more stuffing being scooped onto the plate. That's what I will be listening to earthy sounds like that.
Onto your plate.
Onto my plate. I hope you have a good meal.
You too, Miles. Thanks.
That was Morning Edition's Renee Montagne, along with classical music commentator Miles Hoffman, who died earlier this year. Hoffman was 71 years old. This is NPR News.
And you're listening to it right here on North Country Public Radio. It's about 8:30. Good morning. I'm Monica Sandreski. Join us this afternoon for String Fever. It's the Thanksgiving edition with Barb Heller, and it's a mostly instrumental program, perfect for holiday dining or dancing. Few words, lots of great music, not too much talking. So clear the floor and enjoy some slow dancing after your festive meal, or play String Fever as a perfect background soundtrack for some fine dining this afternoon between 3 and 5 o'clock with Barb Heller right here on North Country Public Radio.